decade, started a new organization called the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation, which is trying to jump into the public sphere and make a space for talking about religion, business, freedom, faith in this public sphere. To just give one example, I'm back and forth between Europe quite a bit, and we're setting up a Religious Freedom Study Center at Milan University, which is a secular university, where we'll be hosting a global forum at the Milan Expo, the big World Expo, on the business of food. So I'm inviting business people that have some faith testimony, religious leaders, and academics to be part of this global forum. So jumping into the public sphere is not easy. In fact, you would think in Italy, religion's sort of an okay topic, but the organizers of the Expo, a multi-billion-dollar endeavor, were afraid to have something of religion on the program. So, it took some working, and it'll be an interfaith, multi-faith event. But in that space, then there's the ability to speak as Christians. So I think that's the challenge. We live in a multicultural world. Cardinal Scola of Milan, the Archbishop of Milan, runner-up to Pope Francis, I hear, by some good rumors.
That came from Cardinal Scola.
Well, the Italian Bishops' Conference did send a congratulatory telegram out. Congratulations, Pope Scola, in a white smoke out. So there are some others adding to the rumor. But Cardinal Scola is very interested in how Christians can speak out in a world of diversity. So, just like we want to hear other voices, the Christian voices there. So I don't know if anybody's read, I missed the morning, I was at the State Department with a meeting on religious freedom all morning in the Middle East. But I wanted to read a scripture yesterday. I'm Catholic. First speaker's Catholic, so we're sort of heavy on the Catholic on this end of the panel. But yes, I go to Mass at the United States Naval Academy, and yesterday our priest preached, and he read this sermon, he read the scripture from yesterday, and he said, you need to just go home and think about it and do this, and there's just so many sermons in here, and he tried to give one, but he said, keep thinking about this scripture. So I thought I'd read it, because this is what, as Christians, we have to offer the world. It's from Luke chapter 6, 27 to 38. Jesus said to his disciples, To you who hear, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. To the person who strikes you on one cheek, offer the other one as well. And from the person who takes your cloak, do not withhold even your tunic. Give to everyone who asks of you, and from the one who takes what is yours, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. For if you love those who love you, what credit is it to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do the same. If you lend money to those from whom you can expect repayment, what credit is it to you? Even sinners lend to sinners and get back the same amount. But rather, love your enemies and do good to them, and lend, expecting nothing back. And then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for He Himself is kind and merciful to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Stop judging, and you will not be judged. Stop condemning, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and gifts will be given to you. A good measure, packed down together, shaken down, and overflowing, will be poured into your lap. For the measure with which you measure will in return be measured out to you. So as Christians, we have just one law: love. So that's the challenge, for Christians in think tanks. I'm a sociologist and leading a global effort. But really, it just comes down to one thing: are we loving our enemy? Are we loving our neighbor? So there's no barrier to that in the public sphere. So my question is to our panelists: how can you go out and do all this in the public sphere, and what are the challenges to being a loving Christian in the public sphere today? Tom Farr from the Berkeley Center's Religious Freedom Project, Georgetown University. And you can, each of them will have about 5 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions. And I think we have a visitor coming in at 10 after 2, so we'll have to keep a bit on schedule. Tom.
Thank you, Brian. I think that's a tough challenge, and I appreciate it. How to love in the public square, and it sort of recenters a little bit of what I wanted to say. But I think it's exactly right. It is exactly right. And I'm tempted to say something theological here, but if I do, I won't have anything else to say since I only have 5 minutes. So let me try to keep Brian's wonderful preface in mind and jump into what I want to say here. Two things we've been asked to do. Talk a little bit about the situation that we're facing in our respective countries, and then talk about how to engage in the public square. The situation of religious freedom in the United States, which is the one that I engage in, I think is a perilous one. I think we're at great risk of losing our religious freedom in the United States. And people of goodwill disagree over the facts on this, and if indeed they think that religious freedom is as much at risk as I believe it is, they may disagree over what the causes are. But my own view is that while there's much to be said here, the big picture view is that we have lost in the United States the understanding of religious freedom as the first freedom, which is a very American way of putting it. Religious freedom is necessary, our founders believed, not only to individual human flourishing, but to the success of societies. So that if you don't have religious freedom, it isn't just a claim of privilege by religious people that you're losing. You're losing something fundamental to civilization and to free societies themselves. So if you lose that, you're in trouble. That's my premise. And I think we are losing it. It is causing enormous problems, among others in the field that I work primarily, which is foreign policy and religious freedom. I think it helps to explain in some fashion, at least, and to some degree, why the United States, notwithstanding the fact that it has had for 16 years a statutory requirement to promote religious freedom abroad, has basically failed to do so. It hasn't failed up across the board, but 16 years, and if my colleagues will forgive me, the greatest country in the world, the most powerful country in the world, unable to promote what it is historically, or at least for 200 years, thought of as the first freedom. There's a problem there. And to me, the problem is that we don't know what it means anymore. We don't know how to convince others of its importance, and you can't sell a product that you neither understand nor believe in. And of course, this goes into all of the stuff we talked about earlier, the anthropological crisis, if I can put it that way. I think it was Oz that said it so well, as he often does. We don't know what a human being is, or maybe it was Rocco. I think they both agreed. We don't agree on what it is to be human any longer. So this is a huge problem. Now, there are lots of things to be said, but not very many in the 3 minutes I have left. What we at the Religious Freedom Project at Berkeley Center try to do is engage this issue on its theological and philosophical grounds, much as we talked about today. We hire scholars, hired gun scholars. How do you like that? They aren't really, they're real scholars, and they work around the world in various institutions. Sometimes they're scholars whose institutions aren't interested in their working on religious freedom, so we fund them to do so. The gentleman sitting to my right is one of our scholars, I'm proud to say. Among the things we engage, and this is really my message to you, are the practical issues of religious freedom. And some of them have already been talked about. One of them, Acton Institute, has been working on for years, decades. If you don't believe that religious freedom is fundamental to your individual flourishing or to your country's individual flourishing, what about economic growth? What if we could convince the Egyptians, or for that matter the Chinese, that their own interests were served by moving in the direction of religious freedom? Maybe not as we understand it in the United States or in the West, but certainly in the direction of religious tolerance. So that the Chinese back off a little bit and you'll have more sustained economic growth, which we're very concerned about. Or to Egypt, you'll not only get economic growth, if you can move toward religious freedom, but you'll solidify and stabilize this self-government that you are grasping for, this democracy that you're grasping for and failing to get. We have not only not convinced the Egyptians that that is in their interest, but we have tried. I think it's doable. I suspect there's some who disagree. And finally, I would say that religious freedom is a counter-terrorism tool. Now, there's a thought for you, if you hadn't had it before. Ponder that. We spend a lot of money in my country on various military means of dealing with counter-terrorists until the recent problems that have developed with the so-called Islamic State. We tended to use drones. We've, of course, as you know, had military forces around the world for many years, in part dealing with terrorist issues. What I'm speaking of would cost a great deal less money, and I would hope zero blood, certainly of those that are trying to sell this product. And if you could convince people that they could not only stabilize their societies, but undermine religion-based violence with religious freedom, this is a very practical argument that can circumvent many of the difficulties about your religion and mine, and whether Islam does this or Islam does that. It's a very practical thing. Now, you can't fool people about their religion. Serious religious people understand their religion. You don't trick them, you don't pay them. You may be able to hold a gun to their head, but it won't, at the end of the day, change them fundamentally, even if you get them to say it. What you can do, however, is entice them toward other goals that they want, such as a stable society, such as a stable democracy, such as economic opportunity, stability and security for my children, and convince them with the data and with the experience of humankind that they cannot get what they want without religious freedom. So this is one of the things we're trying to do with gentlemen like, and scholars like Brian Grimm and others, in the way that we're approaching this issue. Now, just a final word. The defense of religious freedom in civil society is one of the themes that I know that this organization is focusing on and talked about. I wasn't here this morning and yesterday. I'm sure it's come up. But I know this is one of the sort of working groups that Todd wants to talk about. This is so important. We had a little bit of a discussion earlier about why not Obamacare. You know, what's the problem with Obamacare? And my response was the threat of government to freedom. Even if government is doing a good thing, my personal view is that it doesn't do very well when it sets out to do these. But leave that aside. The threat of too much power in the hands of too few people is very, very American. And one of the reasons we have had such a vibrant civil society in our country is this very belief. If government can't do it, then private groups have got to do it. And that's why we have so many faith-based institutions in the United States of America. Universities, soup kitchens, immigration naturalization services, hospitals, orphanages, AIDS hospices, run by people because they believe. If you take that away from them, not only are you harming them and their clients, but you're harming American democracy. And this is in peril in my country today. It's in peril because of Obamacare's threat to require some of these civil society organizations to do what they cannot do. Not they won't, they can't, which is to provide abortion coverage. So this is a major topic. My answer, just to sum it up in a bumper sticker, is to try to circumvent some of the theological problems that you're never going to solve, and talk about the practical effects of religious freedom. Or to put it, as a friend of mine once said, a Catholic friend that said, if the natural law is true, there may be some evidence of its being true. And that's what we're trying to prove. Thank you.
Council Alliance Defending Freedom.
Thank you very much. So, brief introduction. I think many of you will be familiar with ADF and its work here in the US, and speaking to some of you will be less familiar that ADF has gone international over the last few years. One of our earlier speakers mentioned that religious freedom requires a global response, and as an organization we recognize that a number of years ago and now have offices in different parts of the world, including Europe, which is where I'm based. Although I'm based in Vienna, Austria, my comments today will be on my homeland of the United Kingdom and the situation for religious freedom and Christianity and religion in the public square in the UK. And just some background, first of all, about the United Kingdom. In April of this year, the Prime Minister made some comments, and he said that people should be, quote, more confident about our status as a Christian country. The claim that Britain is indeed a Christian country was met with a very mixed response, and it sparked, not for the first time, a national debate. But to be sure, England has an established church. Its bishops sit in the House of Lords. The Queen is both head of state and also the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, and one of her titles is Defender of the Faith. And so there can be many arguments made as to why England is historically, for sure, a Christian country, but it's a much more fierce debate as to what role Christianity should play in public life, or more broadly, what role religion should be playing in everyday public life. And I think over the last decade, there's been more and more pressure placed on individuals to privatize their faith, to take it out of the public square and make it something that is much more private. Well, 3 years ago, I was invited to present to a parliamentary inquiry that was looking into just this issue. It was established to investigate the freedoms that Christians have within UK public life. It was called Clearing the Ground, was the name of the parliamentary inquiry. And it was set up in light of a number of high-profile cases that had made frontline news in the media, suggesting that Christians were being marginalised in 21st century Britain. And just to give some examples of those cases and to tie into the three things that Oz mentioned earlier, the speech, conscience and assembly. So when it comes to speech, we had case after case after case in the UK of street preachers being arrested for speaking out on certain issues, most notably sexual morality. When it comes to assembly, we've had many cases where Christian organisations have been told they're not allowed to hold conferences in certain places. Most notable of which was 2 years ago when same-sex marriage was being debated, and we tried to organise a debate in the Law Society on the issue of marriage. And at the time, marriage was still defined as between one man and one woman, and this conference was called Marriage, One Man, One Woman, and the Law Society said that it was against the principles of diversity to hold this conference and prevented it from going ahead. And so we see assembly being threatened as well, and then finally conscience. We see Christian registrars who are fired from work for not performing same-sex civil unions. And increasingly, we're seeing medical personnel facing pressure at work for not being involved in abortion procedures. And later this year, the UK Supreme Court will hear a case involving Catholic midwives who didn't want to supervise abortion procedures. And they were told by the hospital they had to, and that case is now at the UK Supreme Court. So the three things that Oz mentioned, conscience, speech, and assembly, have all made headline news for at least the last 5 to 10 years in the UK. And so this parliamentary inquiry was set up to investigate this and to produce findings. And they produced a 60-page report. Now, obviously, I'm not going to read all of that or even much of it, but I think that because it answers exactly the question that I've been asked to present on today, I will read a few of their findings. And this was a cross-party inquiry, so it wasn't political, one side or the other. They were from various different political parties. And here's the findings, some of them. They said, quote, "The experiences of Christians in the UK seeking to live out their beliefs and speak freely illustrate a very real problem in the way religious belief, and in particular Christianity, is understood and handled. The problem is a pressing challenge to our idea of a plural society. They said court decisions have relegated religious beliefs below other strands of non-discrimination law and effectively created a hierarchy of rights. They said the place of religious belief suffers because companies, institutions, and the government do not take sufficient action to accommodate it. The police demonstrate a lack of understanding of what is a legitimate expression of Christian belief, and government departments handle religious belief in a complex and confused manner and lack sufficient coordination. So they say there's a problem with the courts, there's a problem with the police, there's a problem with the government, there's a problem with businesses and other institutions. And this was the findings of a report published in 2012 that clearly highlight a very real problem in the UK. And I think, for me, I would summarise the problem as follows. The UK is passing more and more laws that contradict or go against core Christian beliefs, and not just the beliefs of many Christians, but also other religions as well. And the most obvious of which would be something like same-sex marriage. Now, as these laws are passed, the question is, what do we do with people who disagree? What do we do with people who disagree, for example, with same-sex marriage? What do we do with people who disagree with various forms of embryonic research, and so on and so forth? And the answer so far has been, a zero-sum game, as it was put earlier. There is no room for people who disagree. There is no particular tolerance for these people who disagree. So, in the workplace, people are being dismissed from work. In business, for example, guest house owners are being sued. And in the civil society sector, we've had Catholic adoption agencies closed down because they wanted to restrict who they gave adopted children to. And so we see this privatisation, this squeezing of Christians in the public square. And as more and more laws move away from a Christian worldview, we are likely to see these tensions increase in the future, I think. But that said, and I'll finish on this, there has been a recognition in the last few months, really, that things may have gone too far, and that there really has been an intolerance towards Christians and others who share similar beliefs. There's one of our justices is called Lady Hale, and she's the Deputy President of the UK's Supreme Court, so second highest judge in the land. Now, she spoke over here at Yale Law School. She's also spoken in Ireland at their law school, and gave a few other talks in the last few months. And she was one of the justices who found against a Christian couple who owned a guest house and who restricted their accommodation to married couples. And a same-sex couple sued them successfully. Eventually their business was destroyed, and she gave that ruling. And she said a few months ago that she thinks she may have got that wrong. Which is something for a judge to admit, at least. She suggested that the law should somehow, in her words, reasonably accommodate these Christian beliefs. And she's also spoken of the need for a conscience clause to somehow be integrated into UK law. And she said, this is a quote that she gave at Yale Law School, she said, "It's not difficult to see why Christians feel their religious beliefs are not being sufficiently respected." And so there has at least been an acknowledgement that we do face a real issue in the UK. And the question is, what is going to be done about it? And I'm not going to suggest anything or say anything, so I'll leave that for questions and answers. I just tee that up for the discussion later.